Good evening. It is 5 p.m. I'm Rob Watton, Chair of the Public Safety Committee and Committee of the Whole today on Tuesday, February 18th, 2025, calling this meeting to order. Please note, Clerk Garrett, the attendance, which includes City Attorney Dina Burke, City Administrator Mike Chambliss, Mayor Catherine Ross, and Council members Dr. Kat Cotton and Council member Kara Christensen, as well as myself, and our acting Chief Parese is in the room. And we have a couple people online as well. So with that, I'll move to the approval of the agenda. Council members, are there any changes to tonight's agenda? Hearing none, the agenda will be approved as presented. Next, we move on to public comments. Not seeing anybody here in the audience. If you do have, and you're listening in through Zoom or through the YouTube channel, we always welcome your comments. You may direct those to the city clerk or myself, and we will make sure that those are read in to our next meeting. So with that, I close the public comment section. And we move on to the minutes, the approval of the minutes dated February 3rd, 2025. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented, council members? Hearing none, we will accept the minutes as presented. And that brings us on to our fire chief, our guest speaker online. And this is Agenda Bill 25015, comprehensive the 2024 Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan update. And with that, Fire Chief Bailey, I see a gray box on my screen.
Yeah, hopefully you can at least hear me. I'm not sure why my camera's not working right now because I turned it on. Can you hear me in the audience?
We can hear you loud and
All
clear.
right. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's not showing up there when my camera didn't turn on, but I apologize for not being there in person. My wife's out of town and I had to be the responsible parent and stay home with my daughter who had wisdom teeth surgery today. So
I hope she's doing okay.
she is doing fine, other than she has me looking out for her. So
All right, sir. Well, I'll let you go ahead from here. Take it from here, please.
Alrighty, so just to go over, so I did not receive any other further comments of changes that I needed to make of the CEMP from the city directors. So we're going forward with the option that was presented originally. Last time we met, you talked about wanting to take it to the full council, which it's on the schedule to go next week. And you talked about three, coming up with three kind of highlights that we wanted to hit on the plan, or things that the fire department is doing in regards to emergency management. And so I prepared some brief statements on that tonight, just to see if that's what you had in mind for me to take forward to the council next week. So what I planned on doing was just starting out with the full council, just a brief explanation of what the CEMP is, how we got to where we are, and that it's a living document. I won't spend time going into that tonight because you've heard that many times in front of you already. But I'll start off that with the full council, just giving a brief summary of what the CEMP is. And then the three things that I wanted to take away, or I wanted to make sure that the full council heard about what we're doing in emergency management. The first one is I wanted to talk about, as it relates to emergency management, how in 2025, we're really focusing on training for the city. And really that has to do with, all the changeover in the last few years, a lot of new staff and new roles. And, knock on wood, we haven't had to open the EOC for anything in the last couple of years. So because of that, we haven't had really any good exercises. So really we're focusing on training, going over the new CEMP, making sure everybody understands their roles, their responsibilities, and how they would function in the EOC moving forward. So what we have planned is we have 4 trainings set this year. The first one will be coming up here end of March 1st of April, and that will be taking all of the department heads and supervisors into the EOC, giving them a chance to see what it is, how it's set up, and what it's about if they have to be in there. So that's our first training. The second is we're going to talk about assigning roles and responsibilities and reviewing at a department level what each department is responsible for. The third training in the third quarter of the year will be just a tabletop exercise with the directors, and that one will be a flood exercise that we're just going to sit and talk about how we would operate. And the last one is going to be a citywide. At the end of the year, will be a citywide exercise where we'll involve all the staff and officially open up the EOC and go through a whole exercise. Besides those trainings, the city is also the city staff will be doing a ICS training throughout the year. The city administrator Chambliss has directed all the staff to get ICS 100, 200, 700, 800, which are the basic ICS trainings we need to be able to operate efficiently. And then all directors and supervisors will be through ICS 300 and 400, which is required to work in an EOC. And we're actually going to be bringing those classes to the city here in a couple months. And then the 400 class will be in the fall. So that's just kind of an overview of what we're doing to focus on training for emergency management in the EOC in the coming year. The next thing I wanted to focus on with the CEMP now finished and bringing looking at the overall status of emergency management in the city is I wanted to focus on external partnerships and relationships and really look at how the city staff and the EOC works together, as well as working with the outside agencies. And what I mean by that is, again, with all the new staff, we haven't really had an opportunity to bring in a lot of those external relationships. So we're going to really focus on kind of building those bridges up again so that we are prepared to work with those external partners. And where I'm talking then would be agencies like North Bend, their EOC, the King County EOC, which is located in Renton. We've already started working that in the last year, going to attending their monthly meetings, their quarterly meetings, the emergency managers, the school district, PSE Tanner, the local businesses is a real important one, making sure we get the message out to the businesses, what we are going to be doing, what they can do to support and resources they need. And I'm going to be speaking in front of the chamber. I believe it'll be the end of February here in 2 weeks. Myself, North Bend, and some representatives from the state will be giving a presentation to some of the business leaders. And then, so the last one is the community organizations, the Ridge ROA, Reclaim, the Reclaim group downtown, some of those other agencies that we might be calling on or working with in cases of an emergency, that we want to strengthen those relationships with as they relate to the OC. The last one that kind of pertains to that too, I just want to briefly mention the CERT group that we have. The CERT, the community responders that we have. It's been a little bit of we've had the classes every year, but we haven't done a whole lot to bring them back in when they're outside of emergency to practice some of those skills. So we do have a new leader, Tom Walker, who was one of our volunteer, and he's retired from a responding role. He's working as he's going to be basically taking on the CERT lead and be our main CERT trainer and manager. He's taken a class from FEMA to be a CERT manager. And some of the goals we're looking at is rebuilding some of the policies and procedures for that group, as well as bringing them in, once or twice a year to help teach new classes, as well as to have training to refresh their skills so they don't feel like it's, they took the training, nothing's happened and they haven't used it in a couple of years. We want to make sure that they're ready to go if we need them and keep them involved. So that's why we want to bring them in to help teach some classes, as well as do some training for them once or twice a year. So those are some of the things that we have on the horizon for the CERT team as part of those external relationships with the community. The last thing that we're focusing on, it started last year, it's carrying into this year, is really updating the EOC. It was we had a strong group with the CCAS group, which are basically the ones in charge of the radio communications. With the retirement of Sergeant Graham and Sergeant Keaton a few years ago, that group kind of dwindled and kind of fell a little bit to the side. they've really, in the last year, I've been supervising that group, and they've really taken the reins on rebuilding up the EOC. They've gotten our trailer. They're working on getting our trailer outfitted in case we need a mobile EOC. They've updated and are refurbishing the radios inside the EOC and relearning. We're working on some of the communications and with IT. And they're also taking on replacing a lot of the antennas on the roof, making them stronger and giving us a better reach if we do need to use those communications in case of emergency. And then again, like I said, with the EOC, updating the EOC, we want to make sure all the staff is in the city is trained. They've probably never seen inside the EOC, so we're going to be bringing them in for the training for that, as well as updating the forms that we use there, some of our manuals, and some of the electronic as well as paper forms that are utilized. So those are kind of the three things that I wanted to focus on what we're doing for emergency management as it relates to both the CEMP and just what kind of our goal is for the next year to strengthen that group and to bring that forward and make sure that we're really prepared in case something happens here in the city. So I'd be open to any comments on that if that's what you were looking for, Councilmember Watton, or if there's anything else that you thought that I should be bringing to the main council group as it relates to the approval of this CEMP.
Well, fabulous. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think that, you know, going through these drills and being ready and, you know, hopefully we will never be in a situation where we have to activate actually responding to something that's of, this magnitude, but without having the preparation beforehand, then you end up with something that's less than desirable. I think the other thing too is when you bring this back to the council is one is we want to make sure that all the council members are aware. Two is those that either view this online through YouTube or they're listening in. I think that that's really important, but we also need to do outreach as well through our communications department to make sure that, because most people, quite frankly, are not going to listen to either the public safety meeting or the council meeting. But I think that highlighting this so that it creates interest and that awareness, as well as we may find some additional volunteers to make sure that this moves forward. You never can have enough volunteers when the call to action happens. So I appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to the two fellow council members if they have any other questions, concerns, or comments. Councilmember Cotton.
Excellent point as far Chairperson Watton about the not only all those points you mentioned for the citizens, but also for preparedness, because we all have to be prepared to take care of ourselves, our families, and not rely on 911 responding to the major earthquake when you can't get out of your home type of a thing. So there's definitely a lot of things for the community part of it. And having been involved in 2 of the EOC activations here for floods in the city, you're right, the preparedness ahead of time is the ultimate thing. I do have a couple of questions for Chief Bailey. Number one, I really appreciate those highlights that you made on, kind of shortening that down as far as the key points there. That is pretty amazing, and I think if that's the walkway points, those are like really important. I did have a question, and I don't mean to go off into the weeds, but this may do a little bit of that. Since, and you've already mentioned this, Chief, is that this being a fluid document, I know this is just an update of it, is my understanding. We've had this in place before, but now it's been, updated to more current times, I guess. Um, in some of the things, and again, the ESFs, when it kind of dives into the roles and responsibilities for each one, I mean, they tend to be more broad. Things are assigned to some of our agencies, and then they're supporting agencies, and then, but my question is this information going to, like, okay, I'm looking at evacuation, um, and it lists the, police as the primary. It lists Parks and Public Works, a secondary, fire department is supporting. Um, do, I guess, do each of the departments provide the information, like it says for Parks and Public Works under evacuation, uh, coordinate public transportation resources, plan to use in the evacuations. Is there already lists in place for these things, like, the after hours or emergency contacts for SVT or the school district? Um, and is that something that Parks and Public Works has? Or is that something that's already in a binder in the EOC?
To answer some of that, so the goal of the plan, like you said, the goal of the plan is very broad. That was suggested to be in nature so that each group or each department from it can, make their own specific plans as to how to meet those objectives or those bullet points, if you will. A lot of that stuff has been created, but I would say, to your point, is it in a binder in the EOC that is probably outdated? Yes, probably some of that. And that's part of the whole purpose of doing that this year. Like I said, really focusing on training now is to get those people with those eyes on it and get each department head looking at, okay, in an emergency, these are the things that I'm responsible for, and going through a checklist and say, okay, yes, I have this. Yes, I have this. I don't have this one. So that it will get them to, to dive in it, start creating that. So part of it is we're looking for not only what we're currently doing, but we're going to be looking for, as we said, it's a work in progress. And, there are some things in there that we probably need to be updated in regards to how we, like you said, phone numbers for the school district, things like that. And that's what we're going to be working on throughout the year, identifying what those gaps may be, and bringing us back up to speed and making sure that we have the right resources available.
That was exceptional comment. Yes.
So two follow-ups to that. Is the plan that with the training and such, that everybody kind of puts in input into the plan, like, let's say for Parks and Public Works, while they're coordinating public transportation resources, they might not know that, hey, so-and-so has the ability to do this, that another department would be able to tell them. Is that something where everybody kind of puts their heads together and helps out or works on each department? Or is it solely the responsibility of a particular, that particular department that's responsible?
I think it's going to be a case of everybody working together, as we bring these groups together and we start talking about, when I design the exercise, those are some of the things I'm going to be looking at, specifically diving into some of those things that I think we maybe not have as tightened up as we need to focus on those in the training, so that when we're done and we have the debrief on the training, we can talk about, okay, well, maybe this piece, and then we can assign it to somebody. And they could work on it. And also, like as I said, the department directors have already been given this, and they were told to start looking at, the areas that they're responsible for, and they can start coming up with those questions. And I've told them, that we can work together. I can work with them to help answer some of those questions to be prepared. So I think it's kind of a two-pronged approach, just like the reason why we put everybody in the room in the EOC, so that we all can, work off of each other and use each other as a resource. And then these trainings are going to help point that out as to where, again, where I said we have those gaps and where we could possibly help each other fill it up, or, I can be used as a resource and I can reach out to King County if there's some questions that I can't answer that a department head might need to answer one of those things that they need to be prepared for. So it'll be a constant reevaluating and moving ourselves toward being better prepared as we move along over the next few years.
And lastly, do you see this, once, and I realize this is always going to be something that's going to be constantly improved upon. Do you see this as something that the departments will reassess and upgrade or update or confirm that everything's still current, like every year or quarterly with training sessions? Or do you have a feeling for that, or what your vision is for that?
In regards to the plan itself, it's going to be looked at every year at the end of the year, and revisions will be made based on things that we've learned from the trainings and as we move forward. And we actually track those revisions. There's a spot in the plan where we track any revisions so that when we do go back to the state after the 5 years, they can see what we've done and also how we've addressed some of the suggestions that they've made to us already. My goal is to have trainings every year in regards to the EOC, just because, as I said, we lost some of the key people within that EOC when the city staff turned over. And in the last few years, there hasn't been a training. We haven't had anything before COVID when we should have been training. And we all know that if you're not constantly exercising different pieces, it falls out one year, and then over time you lose some of those skills or some of that information. So my goal is, after we get this baseline, is to continually keep improving it with training and exercises, at least a full exercise once a year, just so that either new people can be indoctrinated into what we're doing, or to refresh those that have been here as to what needs to happen when we do have an emergency. Like I said, we've been very fortunate, but that's not always going to be the case. And so, although I'm confident that if something happened tomorrow, we'd be ready and we'd be ready to handle it, we can always be better. We can always improve. And I think the biggest one that we need to focus on here in the city is just making sure that we continually keep it at the front of our mind and exercise it, and don't skip on those practices, and make sure that we are hitting those annual trainings to keep people refreshed.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Cotton. Those were excellent questions. And that's part of the reason why we're going through all this. Councilmember Christensen, please.
So one of my comments and questions is going to be similar to Councilmember Cotton's, which was whether or not we were going to continue to have trainings on at least an annual basis. And it's great to hear that the plan is to have that happen going forward. One of my other questions is, in addition to having it open to just the department heads, whether there's been consideration as to whether or not the second and third kind of head of that department, who would potentially be acting in an emergency situation if we were cut off from outside aid, would the trainings be available to those folks as well, just to make sure that if we do have a big emergency, that we have someone in the room who can know and be familiar with what the plans would be, especially just looking at how much, for example, Parks and Public Works would be expected to handle, as well as our police officers and folks at the fire station as well, just to make sure that we do, again, have folks available to address an ongoing emergency if that's what ended up happening.
Training's being provided for everybody at all levels.
Great. And will they have the opportunity to participate in a drill as well?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Because at least when I was doing the CERT things, it was one thing to take the class, and then it was a whole different situation to go in and actually be responsible for doing the things. It exposes where the gaps are in a very visible way that I don't think you can necessarily get from reading a binder. So I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
I think those are really good comments, Councilmember Christensen, because in a natural disaster, you don't know what's going to happen. Somebody may get cut off from their home to get to Public Works.
Yep.
We had this thing a few years ago that I thought was, being in my industry, would never happen. It was pandemic. And it's like, what's a pandemic? Well, we lived through a pandemic. And then we suddenly realized what happens when you take everybody out of the scenario, who steps in.
Yeah.
And I think that's your point is very valid, is that when we run this, it's not just department heads. Let's take all the department heads out. Let's run the same training for those that are second or third in command. And then a couple other things too, and it comes back to duplicity. I mean, computers are down. We depend so much on computers. It seems elementary that we go through and do these scenarios, having all the resources that we think we have until the lights go out, the computer doesn't work, and making sure that the manual that Councilmember Cotton referred to, we can actually find it and know where it's at. I mean, all these things are like, yeah, and I'm reminded every time we have a power outage and we as, you know, a bank, we have to be open regardless. And, you know, you go through these scenarios until it happens and then it's like, oh my gosh, we didn't talk about that. Where's that binder? How do I get a hold of people? And I think those are all really important. I commend Fire Chief Bailey and his team for taking this up, because I think it's very important. You get into an emergency, and if you go through the drill a few times, and it may seem like, well, this is kind of silly until it happens. And then it's like, okay, that memory muscle that we have is, yeah, we know exactly what we need to do. We're not going to panic. We know, you know, we have backup systems. And what if something happened to an entire department like Public Works? Who steps in for that? Or fire department, you're suddenly taken out on an emergency and all hands are on deck. Who's left to run everything? So I think those are all very valid. One other thing, just, and I'm sure you meant to mention that, Chief, and maybe you did, and that's the hospital district, I'm sure is part of the whole plan. I was frantically writing down the list that you were repeating, and I'm sure that's part of it. So I'm sure that's there. So I think those are all really good. One more, and then I'll get to Mayor Ross, and this is really good discussion. And that is, at some point of being able to plug in the council members to what you're doing so that we've got purview, and the Citizens Academy, making sure that that's part of this once you have it up and running. Mayor Ross, please.
And the council would be part of it because you would be making policy decisions
Okay.
as we go along as part of that whole thing.
Thank you.
So one of the great resources we have in Snoqualmie is search and rescue. It's located right here, and there's 9 divisions, 600 volunteers. I talked with their director of operations recently, and he wants to make sure that they are included in any of these exercises that we have. So I guess, Chief, when you said King County EOC, does that include the search and rescue?
When I was talking King County OC, I was talking about the main emergency operations center that's located in Renton. King County Search and Rescue would be an auxiliary piece of that. I don't know if they're actually represented specifically.
Just froze on us.
In that as an ESF with them. As you said, it is a great resource to have here, not only volunteers that live in the area, but also the headquarters up there off of the parkway. So I have that down written on my list to include them.
Okay, and in that list, Carrie Gagnon, she lives in Fall City, is one of the key people for search and rescue. So make sure that she's included in that list, and I know that she'd be very thrilled to be part of it. Awesome. Anything else? Thank you so much on that, Chief. With that, is there any objection of moving that to the regular council agenda under public safety for a full presentation?
Sounds great.
Okay, so you have your marching orders on that, sir. All right, the next one is a discussion point, and that's on the fire quarterly accreditation report. Can you bring that up and share it with us?
I'm working on it. Let me know if it shows up on the screen there.
It's coming. There it is.
All right.
You're live.
Okay, let me get back to. Okay, so this, as you see, we bring this every quarter. I just want to point out that, this is obviously this is the fourth quarter from last year. So there are some things that will be updated, obviously, in the next round, our strategic plan, some of the goals. So just I always get tripped up myself as I'm going through it to make sure, because we have to wait till after the quarter's finished, obviously, to have the numbers and the data to put in there. And sometimes I even myself, I get a little tripped on trying to talk in the past tense and remember that this is, happened 2 months ago. So just to scroll through a couple things that I have down that I wanted to make sure that I highlight to the group as we go through this. I just briefly talked about it. Again, the work plan from the last strategic plan is in here. When we do the first quarter of this year, which will be coming in April, May, it'll have a whole new list, a whole new set of objectives and goals and status for us to start reviewing. So you'll see that will change drastically in the next version. So we're going to go down to, I wanted to talk about incidents a little bit. As I've mentioned previously, we finished 2024 with the highest that we've ever had here in the city, which is 1715 for the year. You can see there in the bottom corner how we've grown over the last few years, 2020 being low because of COVID, and then steadily increased the next 4 years after that. When we're talking about calls, I think it's just important to point out in August you can see on the table there, that's our busiest month so far that we've ever had in the department, which was 175 calls. It's the busiest by 7 or 8 of some of the previous months. And I just wanted to show that there was no real, I look back at the data, there was no real reason or no specific event that necessarily caused that high call volume. Is really just, I think, just from the tourists and the visitors that we have. Our call, you can see on the chart up there, our call volume always goes up in the summer. I think it was just a busy month that we have, but there was no real particular reason, no event that really prompted those high call volumes. The next one I wanted to show here and talk about was the types of calls that we have, just to highlight since we're looking at the whole year now. Comparing 23 and 24, our EMS calls went down about 10%. And, you can see that our false alarm calls went up and our good intent calls will go up. And I looked into that, and I think a lot of that has to do with the calls that we run outside of the city. We're seeing more calls outside the city, but we're also seeing more false alarms or cancels, which would be covered in those two areas. And that's just because if we're running to North Bend or Fall City to back them up on a call, if they clear the call they're on, then they would cancel us and take over, and we'd come back to Snoqualmie. So that's the main reason I think why you've seen those numbers rise up over the last few years with the increase in calls, because their goal is the same as ours. Is they want to get back in their area as soon as possible. They want to handle their own calls, and we do the same thing. If we're on a call and another one comes in that maybe North Bend is covering for us, as soon as we're done, we'll get on the air, ask them, hey, do you need our assistance? Can we take over? So we have that communication back and forth with the other departments to make sure that we get the resources there that we need. The other one I wanted to point out was the mutual aid calls there on the bottom. We've talked about it quite a bit, and it is still going to be a topic of conversation as we move on. But you can see from 23 to 24, the number of calls that we went outside the city did decrease a little bit. It went from 33 down to 31.6, as well as the calls that we received help on. The aid received there at the bottom went up just a little bit. So they were coming into the city just a little bit more, and we were going out just a little bit less between 23 and 24.
Pardon me, Chief, before you move on.
Yes.
Could we go back to the EMS calls, because that seems to be the biggest shift from one year to the next. Is there anything that you can attribute that to?
Not specifically. I mean, the majority of our calls are EMS. Like I said, it could be some of the way that we're categorizing them. And as I said, when we go out of the city more often, and we're calling them canceled calls now, would fall under false alarm more, as opposed to an EMS call. Even though it starts out as an EMS call, if we get canceled, we change it as in our reporting software to a canceled call. So that could be some of the reason as to why you see a little bit of a drop there. I'm going to have to study that a little bit more, though, now that we have the full numbers in for 24 to see if there's anything that we can point to. But there wasn't anything off the top of my head as I was looking through the months that really stood out as to why we might have such that drastic drop, other than just how we categorize it in our run software, our run report software.
Okay, thank you, sir.
The next thing I wanted to look at was just to give you the mutual aid numbers. And these are some of the things that we added in over the last year, or I believe on the next page, we talk about the hospital. So you can see there for the year what we did, for how many times we went to East Side Fire and Rescue. Some of those calls are single calls where we're going by ourselves. Some are multiple unit calls, whether it's a car accident or a fire. Those are all just lumped together for comparison. But you can see we did 493 that we assisted East Side, 45 with Fall City, and then 4 other, which would have been like the Pass or Maple Valley if we're talking over Highway 18. That's where the other is going to fall in. And then we broke it down to also mutual aid received, and that's how many times that they came into the city to assist us with calls. One thing I think I want to do for next year, as I do the quarterly reports for next year, is I want to add a table that shows not only the call, but I want to show the units, because I think show them both together, because I think that's a good thing to point out is, as we've talked about before, when we need help, sometimes we need a lot of help. When we go we need multiple units for a structure fire, 7, 8, 9 units we might have coming in from the outside. Whereas sometimes when we go to North Bend, sometimes we're only going as a 1 unit. So I'm probably going to add those as a new table to this as we go into 25. You'll see we'll have, I haven't figured out how it's going to look yet, but we'll have a comparison of not only just the number of calls, but we'll also look at the number of units that responded on those calls, so you can get a little bit better idea of how the help is going back and forth between the agencies here in the valley.
So Chief, along with that, now that we have 3 new firefighters this year being added, firefighters / EMTs, would there be a possibility of going back and, without a lot of work, determining how many times or days out of service we are for last year versus this year? Because my suspicion is that we're going to be out of service far fewer times this year because of having more staffing. But can you noodle that? And it's maybe very onerous to do, but I think being able to tell that story with numbers might be beneficial to show.
Yeah, one of the stats, I mean, and there's different way. Obviously, there's a bunch of different ways you can look at it. I am working on some options on tracking that and being able to report out on that. We actually have a meeting next week with another, I guess you would call it a service provider or a company that does a lot of that dashboarding and looking at our numbers, both for accreditation as well as any other thing that we want to study. In the past, we've relied, for example, accreditation, we've relied on Bellevue to help us out with some of our response numbers. I want to get away to where, I have control of that and I don't have to wait for them to assist me with the numbers. So this company, I'm hoping, is going to be able to not only provide us with some of our accreditation numbers that we need, but then also to be able to look at things like unit reliability, how often Snoqualmie has a unit available in the city, be able to track a lot better as to where we're going, what type of calls they're going on, and whether we have, what we're doing with our other units while 1 unit is out of service. So there's a couple different ways that I'm tackling that, and hopefully we'll be able to get some some better ideas and some better, to data to look at to really, flesh out how these three firefighters helped us. Other than, we're working as a staff, we're working on coming up with new response plans, or not response plans that are coming from dispatch, but ways that we respond to, okay, instead of taking 4 people to the hospital on a transport, how we've done it in the past, keeping the crew together. Now that we have more times that we're going to have more firefighters on duty, we'll be able to break it and say, okay, the engine can stay behind with the officer and the engine driver. 2 people can go on the transport, and then they'd be available for another call. Maybe, they wouldn't be available for a fire response because you wouldn't want to respond with a fire engine with less than 2 people, but they'd be available for, say, an automatic fire alarm, a service call, or an EMS call. They'd be able to add themselves to the run and be able to respond. So those are some of the, the goals of having these 3 new firefighters, not only to, obviously the biggest one is try to reduce the overtime and the strain and the hours the firefighters are working. But one of the benefits of that also is we're going to have a lot more staffing in the city than we have in the past, and more opportunities to break that cross staffing and have 2 units available. So those are all things that I'm going to be looking for ways to quantify as we go throughout the year, how we can track that and see changes from year to year.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
The next one down here is we have transports by Snoqualmie, and this is just, again, to give you kind of a snapshot of what we're doing, how many times we are transporting out of the city. You can see there, 284 is how many that we had. 73 transports we had in East Side's area, where we responded to East Side and then ended up transporting the patient and received received financial, a benefit from that, and then 2 in Fall City. And then you also down there, you can see what hospitals we went to. Mainly, we spent most of our time at Snoqualmie Valley and Swedish. A few times we transported Overlake, but I think you can see that the reason why Overlake's a little bit less is we really try to focus on taking the patients to the 2 closest local hospitals. Not only are they, great facilities that they can go to, but also the quicker, the closest hospital we can go to, the sooner we can get that unit back available. So the crews are told, if you're transporting to Snoqualmie or Issaquah, we transport ourselves. A lot of times, if the patient wants to go to Overlake or even further, that's when we might use a private ambulance service to come in and do the transport for us. Depending on the severity of the patient. Probably those 28 that we transported were ones that either a private ambulance wasn't available, or the patient was serious enough that we weren't going to wait around for a private and we needed to get them in. So just wanted to point out, that's why you see such high numbers here, locally is, taking our patients to those hospitals, but also an effort by our crews to try to go to the closest appropriate hospital and get the units back in service sooner. One other thing that we might look at going forward too, and I'm not sure if it's going to be in the quarterly report or not, but we do have a new report because System Design is the third party that we use for our billing, and I had them create a report for us so that we can start tracking money received from transports outside the city of Snoqualmie. So we'll be able to actually look at, we can see up there that we transported 73 times we transported patients from East Side's area. We'll be able to look and see how much maybe was brought back into the city as revenue from those transports, just to give her a better idea of what we're gaining from, even though, yes, it does take us out of the city, we do get a little bit of that comes back to the city in regards to the transport bills. Unfortunately, they can't go back and look at the previous years. They can only look forward. And we just had that report created in, I believe, just November. They had that finished for us. So it won't be able to look backwards, but we will be able to look forward in the coming years just to kind of get a better snapshot of where our resources are going and what's coming back to the city. Obviously, it might be delayed, 4, 5, 6 months as, insurance payments come in, but it's just another metric that we can look at just to see, how that all shakes out. So that'll be something that we'll have available to us as we move through 25. Our performance measures, these are what's created. Like I said, these are our numbers in the city. This is created as part of our accreditation. Again, you can see most of our turnout times. That's how long it takes the crew to get out the door. The majority of them you can see there are within 0 to a minute 30. Minute 30 is our goal to get the crews out by. Anything above a minute 30, they actually have to report back monthly to me at the officer meeting. Any responses above 130 with a potential reason. So we look at it monthly. And a lot of those are things that are explainable. They had to stop to get their bunker gear on. It happened in the middle of the night, so we're just a little bit slower at night than we are during the day, obviously, as the crews wake up. But it's something that's always in the mind of our crews, and they're working on to get those numbers down. There are some that, again, there are some above 130, up to 3. Those are all different reasons, but we do look at those from month to month and look for ways to lower those and bring those back down. We also look at our apparatus travel time within the city. Again, most of the responses you're going to see within the city are handled within 8 minutes. I think, yeah, up to 432 is the most number there is 357, 0 to 8 minutes. There are a few outliers having to do with we're responding to emergency, or maybe if we're on some of the outliers would be if we have to stage for PD, so the amount of time it takes us to get to the patient. But again, this is something that the crews are looking at monthly, and they have to report back to me monthly at the officers meeting any outliers. So we're constantly working to try and get those numbers down, the ones that we can change. Sliding on here to the next one to report out on is our inspections. You can see over the course of the year, fourth quarter was a little lower than what we like to see. And I think this was just attributed to the number of the amount of training we had to do with the new members that we brought on. We've brought on 3 people over the last couple months. And so a lot of the crew's time was spent on training. Although we did meet our goals, as we talked about before, how we've broken our inspections down to 1, 2, and 3 year timelines. We've met all our goals, and the crew, some of the day staff, the training officer, and the deputy chief have worked in January and February to help the crews follow up on some of these to bring that up. But that's just a little bit of the explanation as to why it was a little lower in the fourth quarter, mainly because the crews were just busy. They weren't able to get out as much as they wanted to do the inspections. The last one we have here is property loss. And then just to point out, these are, we've talked about over the past, but we didn't have any fire loss in the fourth quarter. And just to kind of highlight, it doesn't show it shows our annual property saved, which again is a very low number. We know having to do with the fires that we had downtown in April. But overall, really good in the city. We just had, in the first quarter, we had 1 fire loss, which was a picnic shelter up on the ridge, and that was $3,500. And then obviously in April, we had the one downtown, which is, roughly $1.3 million loss. That's what really brought us down. So when you add that all together, that's where we get the percentage that we did for the year. But the third and fourth quarter, we had no fire loss for the city. So really it was just those 1 or 2. And I think that's just a testament to the, what we're doing here in the city, in the community, that we don't have a lot of fires. When we do have fires, the 1 or 2 a year usually is what happens, but a lot of them, we get there quick, we get them put out, and there's not a lot of loss for the residents. We were able to contain them. So I think that's just a testament to how the crews are training and how we're doing in the city, is that we don't see that fire loss where we have a couple fires, 3, 4, 5 fires a year. Usually we're down 1, 2, maybe 3 a year. And again, that doesn't include times that we go outside the city. That's only fire loss within the city limits. The crews do, respond multiple times, either to East Side or Fall Cities area to assist with fires, but that's just fire loss within the city. So that comes to the end of what we're talking about for our quarterly report. As I said, there's a few things that I want to address this year. I want to look to see if there's a way we can put in maybe some of the financial for transports, if we think that's a good idea, if there's a way to do that, or it might just be a separate thing that we have available to us if we want to go back to it. And then we also talked about changing some of the mutual aid responses and showing a little bit better on there. Is there anything else off the top of your head? And obviously, if you think about it later, you can reach out to me by email or let me know. Some of the things that we've talked about over the year, we've already made those changes. We added in some of the hospital stuff. We changed around some of the colors to make it easier to read. Is there anything else the Public Safety Committee would like to see maybe added to this report or expanded that I can look at as we move to make changes in 2025?
Council members, anything that you'd like to see?
I mean,
Okay.
what Chief's mentioned already, but.
Okay. My next question to the committee, and that is, should this go on consent agenda or should it go under public safety for a report?
Usually I think it's just informational, isn't it?
Yeah,
But
consent,
especially if we're doing the larger plan as well.
right? Consent? Okay, we'll move it to consent if there's no objection.
Do we take action on it?
We don't. No.
On the consent agenda? I think it's just, isn't it usually just under public safety as an informational?
Right, we just put it, right,
Okay,
information.
under public safety then? Okay, it is. All right. With that, we are down to the end of our hour. Council members, are there any other things that you'd like to bring up tonight or future
You're
meetings?
breaking up there, but I think you're asking about it. Usually I don't report out at it in the actual meeting. I'm
That's what I was thinking. I thought it was under consent, but it's not?
not sure.
Okay, we'll just be there and if there's any
I'll just
questions.
reference it and tell people.
Sure if that's
Okay,
what
very well.
you're asking, or if my screen is.
You're kind of breaking up, Chief. This is part of our emergency management, testing all of our.
You're in the EOC.
Yeah, exactly. And Chief Bailey, you and I are gonna have an offline discussion about that one item that we'll bring back to the committee at some point, and that's the brush truck. So, no deep discussions tonight or in the near future. So, is there anything else? Hearing nothing else, we are at the end of our agenda, and I move for our adjournment. Is there any objection? Hearing none, we stand adjourned at 5:52 p.m.